Once upon a time, somewhere in our galaxy, there existed a race of beings, intelligent, beautiful, talented, all to a degree beyond our ability to comprehend. We could not even grapple with, apart from approaching their intelligence, we cannot even grapple with the level to which it reached, their ability and what they could do. Among them were musicians, designers, artists, with abilities that go way beyond, of course, anything human, and with the power to go with it. The ability to create. Never at any time had there ever been gathered together more creativity than existed among this race of beings. As great as they were, there was one at their center who was as much greater than they as they were greater than us, than we. If you can just comprehend what that means. But one of them had a problem. And we read a little bit about him in the 28th chapter of Ezekiel, in verse 14. Writing of this one, God says, "You are the anointed cherub that covers." There were apparently, judging from the symbolism of the Ark of the Covenant, two cherubim that were placed actually over the Ark of the Covenant in the position there, one of them with his wings spread over from one side, the other from the other, and they covered the Ark. And the implications of this is that there were two cherubs, real cherubs, not just models as those that were on the Ark of the Covenant, that covered the throne of God, that were one on the right hand and one on the left hand. And he is speaking here apparently to one of those beings who was in that position. "You are the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set you so. You were upon the holy mountain of God. You have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You were perfect in all your ways from the day that you were created until iniquity was found in you." He passes on down and he says in verse 17, "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You have corrupted your wisdom by reason of your brightness. I will cast you to the ground. I will lay you before kings, that they may behold you." But you may not realize it was through pride that the devil became the devil. That one called Lucifer actually became the devil. Now you think about that for a little while. When you try to grasp or deal with or comprehend what it means to be one of a race of intelligent, beautiful, talented, creative people who could create music that would, boggle your mind. Their works of art, their creativity, their powers of design, well, you can see them. For I have little doubt that God, in the process of creating the world, used this team of designers. That angels were involved, what we call angels, were involved in the design work that you see around you on every side. And you can take a petal of a flower and put it under a microscope. You can look at the whole design of a flower as it can be described for you. It has been described for you in biology textbooks. You can look at the human body and realize that it is a piece of absolutely staggering design. It's something that you and I, in our attempts to try to even approach it, are clumsy by comparison. We try to make artificial hearts and wind up, failing repeatedly at our efforts just to create something to pump liquid through the veins of this body. We pump it and still wind up killing people in the process. But these created the original, designed it. And not only designed it, but had the power to actually bring it into existence. And that is indeed staggering. Now, if you were one of that group of people, don't you think you could have found it in you somehow to have been content to be beautiful, talented, creative, with all of these things that you could do? And yet this one was not. We are told that pride, whatever pride is, entered the picture, and therefore really destroyed, effectively, his wisdom. For it was as though this person with incredible intelligence, wisdom, ability, and whom all indications are, was himself a musician. That once pride entered the picture, it was like one took all these talents and this intelligence and just twisted it ever so slightly, creating a distortion, corrupting it, to where it no longer was useful, no longer was creative, but became destructive instead. And it's really hard to deal with. But you know, for the last 2,000 years, it has been pride that has caused talented, capable people to become a destructive force in the church. In fact, I was sitting around thinking about this the other day, and I had to realize I had to own up to it. I've had now 25 years to observe the churches, from the posture or the position of one who was appointed to serve the church and to work for the church. And over that period of time, I have had to come to realize that the most destructive force at work in the church is pride. Pride is, of course, we all know, one of the 7 deadly sins. It has been listed down through history. It is and has been called by early church thinkers the essential vice. That vice which really leads to all other vices. That vice which of all of them is the most destructive. It has also been called the utmost evil, and C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, pride is the complete anti-God state of mind. Now, that's really an extreme statement in a way. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Now, we have a problem with the concept of pride. And we tackle this thing in different ways. We speak of pride in terms of being good pride or of being bad pride. We take pride, for example, in a garden, don't we? We go out and put a lot of work into it and plant flowers, and we try to put them in different arrangements so that they will be beautiful and will be aesthetic and pleasing to the eye. And then we stand back and we take pride in what we have done. And we do not generally feel that is an evil reaction that we have, that is something to be ashamed of or something to apologize for, do we? Parents commonly take pride in their children's accomplishments, don't they? Is there something wrong with that? Is there something wrong when your child comes home from school with a report card of all A's, that you should feel proud of that? That you'd want to show that to someone? That you would want to share it and to say, look what my boy has done, and to pat him on the back and give him some encouragement? Generally speaking, we look upon that as a wholesome response on the part of parents to the things that their children do. And in fact, we generally, I think that it's a certain amount of legitimate pride that causes us to comb our hair, to wash our face, to maybe, among some of the ladies, to put on a little pancake makeup and smooth out the complexion, or maybe some blush or a little lipstick, maybe line the eyes. All of this is to, I guess, improve on what God gave us to begin with. But after all, He told Adam and Eve to take the Garden of Eden and dress it and keep it. Were they supposed to do nothing to improve upon it? Of course they could. I mean, the idea that a person can't plant, let's say, red flowers and white flowers together to create a concept because this is vanity would be stupid, wouldn't it? So we acknowledge the fact that pride seems to play a role that leads to people exercising good habits and good grooming. It actually, in some ways, improves our relationship with one another in the sense that a certain amount of pride even is essential in human dealings, it would seem, in getting along with one another. And at the same time, though, we recognize pride as a sin. And the Bible plainly sets it forward as a sin, and a very destructive sin at that. Now, how do we deal with this? I can only say we deal with it rather badly. We really don't seem to have good, clear ideas in our mind about the nature of pride. We try to deal with it sometimes in terms of semantics. For example, nowadays, pride is probably not looked upon as a particularly bad term. If we say he is a proud man, we basically mean by that sort of a grudging compliment, acknowledging the handicaps that go along with his pride, but by and large we can be tolerant of a man who is a proud man. It means it's hard for him to accept charity from somebody else if he's gotten himself into trouble. It means that he feels a responsibility to kind of dig his own way out and get himself back on top again. And it is a characteristic that we do not particularly despise. And so we take the word pride and we set it off against, say, vanity. Pride is not so bad, but vanity is bad. And try somehow or other to see a difference between the two of them. Psychologists have taken a look at the problem of people who have essentially no pride and the destructive effect that seems to have on them, and they have coined the expression self-esteem to deal with what they are trying to put back into a person. And you could just as easily say pride, for it is pride or self-esteem that causes a person to make certain decisions, as I said, even to the point of making yourself look your best, of taking care of your home, of washing your car, of trying to keep things looking neat around the place. This pride, or as other people might call it, self-esteem. Now, I don't really know that I know what self-esteem really is. It seems to be a useful term that psychologists use, but it has almost gotten to the place to where it's like a gospel of self-esteem nowadays. But it's one way that we say, well, self-esteem is good, but pride is bad. And so we try to make this distinction along the way. If we can't get it any other way, we just say, well, there's a good pride, the right kind of pride, and there's a wrong kind of pride, and a bad kind of pride. But then I ask the question, is it really a matter of kind, or is it a matter of degree? In other words, do we have a kind of pride over here, or self-esteem, that is a good kind, and over here we have a bad kind of pride or a self-esteem, and this is bad. In whatever degree, in whatever measure, at whatever level, it is bad in a small way when there's a little bit of it, and it's bad in a big way when there's a lot of it. And over here, this is good in a small way when there's little, and better as it gets more. And this is bad pride, good pride, different kind of pride. Or is really pride just simply pride, and is it bad in some degrees and good in other degrees? How do you look at it? You know, this approach and how you actually grapple with this thing makes a great deal of difference in how you respond to some of the feelings you have about yourself and about other people, and even how we relate to one another in the church. Let's take this term self-esteem, for example, that is so freely bandied about. Now, self-esteem is good. People who have no self-esteem oftentimes engage in very destructive types of behaviors. And a great deal of psychology is designed to try to build that person's self-esteem back, help them find that self-esteem, and bring them back to a certain level. Now, if self-esteem then is good, is more self-esteem better? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Like anything else, it seems that if you carry this self-esteem, this building of self-esteem, to a certain place, then even that could become destructive. Nature is absolutely full of illustrations of the fact that a little of some things is good, but more is not necessarily better. Take salt. You know, a little bit of salt is great on your food, but a lot of salt is not. It's very disturbing. It makes the food very unpleasant. It makes something you put it away from you very quickly. And of course, a little bit of salt, the Bible says salt is good, but a great deal of salt is very bad for your health. Everybody knows that, don't they? Nature, as I say, abounds with illustrations. Take, for example, certain vitamins that you might like to take. A deficiency in these vitamins is very bad for your health. You can take the vitamins and get better. So since I took the vitamins and I got better, maybe if I take even more of them, I will get better yet. And so you load up on vitamin A and give yourself some very serious health problems, just as serious, sometimes in fact more serious, than having too little. Where is it? Where is the boundary? Well, you see, that one of the problems with this thing of realizing it's a matter of degree is that when you're dealing with degrees, you can't draw lines very successfully. That you really don't know where it is good and where it is bad. And the exact point at where it crosses over is oftentimes very difficult to deal with and very difficult to understand. I think you might consider, as long as we have to deal in words and it's the way we communicate, the Greeks give us a good clue as to the meaning of this word. The word pride, as it's used in the New Testament, as it's translated in the New Testament, seems to be universally bad, and the reason for it is found in the Greek language. What they do in Greek is they take the word for appearance or shining, and in other words, it's like a manifestation. It's derived from the Greek root word for light, phos, and then it goes into phanos or phino, which gives us the idea of a shining forth or appearing type of thing. In order to create the word pride out of this, all you do is add the word hyper in front of it. The Greek word hyper, which means over, or over light, overshining, over-appearing, overdoing. So in other words, the whole question, and the Greeks present it to us as a matter of degree, that the appearing and the appearances and giving attention to appearances is not bad. In fact, it's good. But then the over or hyper attention to it is not good. It's bad, and it's destructive. So, in fact, you can look at this and say, okay, I think I can grapple with that. Pride could easily be then looked upon as a matter of degree. That having no pride at all might lead to some very unfortunate things in my life. I might be a doormat for people when I should not. I might not stand up for my own rights when I should. This lack of self-esteem could cause me to actually hurt other people, as indeed I suspect that it is true in many cases of child abuse. It is because of a lack of self-esteem on the part of a parent who is engaging in child abuse. And so too little creates a terrible problem. And you try to bring a person to an awareness of a balanced approach to himself and to the world and to people around him, and let's say an increased self-esteem, and you can help maybe with some of those destructive behaviors. But then if it goes on beyond that, and the same basic factors are involved, the way you look at yourself, the way you present yourself to other people, as you begin to take them to extremes, behaviors once again become destructive. And I've seen the pattern existing again and again throughout the church. What can pride do for you? Well, it can make you insensitive. Now, one thing that a person who has too little self-esteem may be very sensitive to people's criticism, overly sensitive to it, and improving to the point where they have a good self-image or a good awareness of themselves or a realistic appraisal of themselves, then they don't have to be so sensitive to criticism. But then as a person goes on beyond that and becomes prideful, then oftentimes once again there is a willingness to be either insensitive to or hypersensitive to criticism. For a person who is too wrapped up in himself may blow up when criticized. A person who is too involved with himself may not even realize it when people are trying to suggest that his behavior is not what they would want, and do not get the signals and do not realize what's going on, and completely unaware of the fact that they have disapproval coming at them from all sorts of quarters among people who might be in the church or in their family or among their friends. Pride can cause you to offend people. And in fact, oftentimes people who have too much pride don't really care whether they offend people. It's this insensitivity, this unawareness, this lack of concern for, not even really caring that much about how other people respond or how they feel about the things that you're doing. I have often wondered at people whom I thought were intelligent, capable, and really creative people who seem to have these unbelievable blind spots in their life, things that I would have thought any person with an IQ of 85 would have been able to see. They go right over the top of it, and I finally one day began to realize, and I began to use this terminology in my dealings with such people, they have blind spots. And those blind spots are created by pride that will not let them look at themselves objectively. Pride can make you stubborn. It has this manifestation. Now, there are two ways of doing this thing that we are talking about doing. There's the wrong way and my way. And, of course, your way is the wrong way, and my way is the right way, and no amount of reasoning is going to convince you that anything else could possibly be true, because, after all, you are a smart person, you're an intelligent person, you've got a grip of the facts, and there isn't any way you could be wrong in this particular situation. Pride can make you very stubborn. Pride can make you selfish. Pride can turn people against you. Pride can cause you to resent people that you otherwise might like and enjoy. You know how that works? Well, the essential factor, it seems, involved in pride is competition, competitiveness, the desire to be above than, better than, apart from, somehow to overcome other people. It's what leads people to insist on having their way. It's a competitive spirit that oftentimes gets involved in this time. I'm going to show people that I'm right. And the result of this is it turns people against you and causes you sometimes to resent people whom you otherwise might like a great deal because they are rivals. They have their way of wanting it, and that's not the same as yours, and you can't possibly be wrong. It can even do something worse to your life. It can even make God your enemy. You ever thought about that one for a little while? That pride could even make God your enemy. Now, the book of Proverbs is replete with references to pride, and I'd like for us today to take a look at a few scriptures and consider how we ought to think about pride and how we ought to look at ourselves and our relationship to one another and our relationship to the church, to the destructive behaviors that sometimes go on in our families, in our church, and regretfully even in our nation, and how they come from and how they relate to this sin called pride. In the 16th chapter of the book of Proverbs, verse 5, everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. Everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to God. Now that's a sobering thing to reflect on when you think, as I said before, about, well, I'm proud of my garden. You know, I'm proud of my child's achievement, my boy's achievements in school. I'm proud of the fact that my boy, played basketball and has been high point man in several games this year. I feel a certain surge within me. There's something going on down in my chest feeling. I feel it when my boy does that. I just feel great when he does. Is that an abomination to God? Oh, it can't be. It can't be. And yet pride is. And I can only conclude, again, it is a matter of degree. But where is it? Where is the degree? Where does it cross over? Where does it start becoming a problem? Well, let's consider being proud of the fact that our boy brought home a straight A grade card. And you feel this tremendous satisfaction. Now, pride, remember, makes you insensitive, doesn't it? And in the process of exulting in this, you make it a point to speak to one of your friends about this, and you said, hey, old Johnny came home from school and had a straight A grade card. And you didn't even think about the fact that your friend's boy has been struggling. That he walked in with 2 C's, a D, and an F. And his dad has just been agonizing over what to do about that. Do you realize that your joy and your happiness can create pain in someone else? The difference between the pride that is an abomination to God and the pride that is not is that the pride that is an abomination to God hurts others. That it is corrosive. It is insensitive. It is destructive of relationships, and it is competitive. For if somewhere deep down inside of your mind was a desire to impress upon your friend how much better your boy was in school than his, what have we done? Where are we in our relationship with other people? What is this going to create? Well, this is the type of thing when the writer of Proverbs says, everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. It is this subtle difference that we are dealing with in what really constitutes pride. Down in verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And I've always thought of that in terms of, if I allow pride to get the better of me, and my vanity, my ego, my pride in my accomplishments, and my vaunting of myself, that this goes before my own destruction. And I think that is true. But that isn't what it says. It just says pride goes before destruction. And that destruction may not merely be the destruction of yourself. Let's go back to our illustration of bringing home the report card again and calling up your friend about it again. This is a tiny, small torpedo into his little world, isn't it? It may not destroy his world. It may not disrupt relationships over whole families. But it is one little pinprick into his life that he did not need, didn't ask for, and that you gave him. Even if you had sat down for a minute and thought about it, you would have known better. Now, all of us have had the experience of walking up to somebody and slapping him on the back, and then learn he's got a sunburn. Only after we, do that. In fact, it seems to me that there's a law that the only time I ever slap anybody on the back is when they have a sunburn. And we do these things many times without meaning to hurt. And oftentimes the things that our pride causes us to do, we do without meaning to hurt. But pride, in one form or another, let's put it in a church environment. And let's put it in a situation of a competitive spirit that might get going among men or women in the church, and of men in particular who are giving sermonettes from time to time, could become terribly destructive to a church. Pride precedes and leaves in its wake destruction. Now, you would think there would be no place for that among religious people, wouldn't you? You might think that. But you would be wrong, because it certainly does find place. Maybe you can argue that it shouldn't be there. But we can argue until the cows come home about what should be. We have to face what is. And whenever God's people come together, pride comes also among them, doesn't it? It's just like that day when all the sons of God came to appear before God, and Satan came among them. He was one who was guilty of pride, of self-exaltation, of one who wanted to exalt his throne above the stars of God, of one who wanted to make himself equal with God, of one who wanted to exalt himself. And he became a destroyer. And it's very possible for capable, talented people in God's church to become destroyers in the same way that Satan did. The difference between you and Satan is you still may repent of whatever kind of destruction you may cause or hurt you may cause among God's people by your pride. Because pride is and always will be a great destroyer in the church. In Matthew the 16th chapter, Jesus began to address that. He addresses it seems, again and again. He said in verse 6 of Matthew 16, actually beginning verse 6. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place entirely. I meant to be in Matthew 23. Missed my notes. Matthew 23 and verse 6. Actually, we'll begin a little earlier than that. He says, the scribes and the Pharisees, verse 2, sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you to observe, you observe it and do it, but do after their works. Do not after their works, for they'd say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders. But they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. And you have to think about that a little bit once in a while. About those who would lay burdens on other people that they would not even pick up themselves. Why do they do that? Controlling other people's lives and other people's behavior. Being able to say do and see people do it is so gratifying, isn't it? To be able to say do and have them do it. And it's so infuriating if you have any authority at all to say do, and they say do it yourself. What would you do if, you're a father and you got a 12-year-old boy and you tell him to go do it, and he says, go do it yourself, Dad? I don't know about your house, but when I was growing up, I would have found myself in a heap against the wall. There wasn't any, there was swift and sure retribution against backtalk in my house as I grew up, so it was a very sobering thing. But they like to tell people what to do. And they love the uppermost rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues and greetings in the market, and be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. Don't be called Rabbi. Don't go looking for titles like Master, because that's what Rabbi was, is a master. He said, for one is your master, even Christ, and all you are brethren. And call no man your father upon earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be you called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever shall exalt himself shall be abased. And bingo, we just stumbled on the other concept of pride. Self-exaltation. The raising up and the exalting of self. Now what's funny about this word is that it also seems to be used in both good sense and bad sense in the Bible. It is one thing, it is a fine thing to be exalted, but it is an evil and a wrong thing to exalt yourself. It is perfectly acceptable to exalt others. It is right to exalt God, and it is right for God to be exalted, but it is wrong for you and I to exalt ourselves even in small ways, so it would seem. Whoever will exalt himself shall be abased. He that shall humble himself shall be exalted. Notice he will not exalt himself. It's passive. He will be exalted. Now I said apparently that this is true in relatively small ways, and I want you to turn back with me to the 14th chapter of Luke. Luke chapter 14. This is one I've thought a lot about. This was read to us repeatedly in college, and little reminders were sent our way as a regular thing in our lives to try to impress these things upon our minds. But the problem with this, and I guess I could discuss that another time, but with all these references to humility that we got in college, and all these reminders to humble ourselves and to, in the very smallest ways, to avoid even the show of pride or self-exaltation, We were placed into a situation that exalted or honored exaltation or created a ladder for you to climb and made you want to climb it and to move up it, because the people who were higher up exercised authority on the people who were lower down. So why did you want to get up? So you could say go, and he'd go, and say come, and he would come, and say do, and he would do, and nobody would give you any back talk. That was a lot of the factor involved in it. In this chapter, Luke 14, in verse 7, he says, he put forth a parable to those who were bidden, when he noticed how they chose out the chief rooms in a feast. In other words, they would come in and they would look for the best rooms, and apparently these feasts would go on in more than one room, where the influential people were, where the beautiful people were, where the impressive folks were, where the honored seats were, and that's where they went. Boy, they went there just as fast as they could actually get there. And he said, when you are bidden of a man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than you be bidden by him, and he that bade you and him come say to you, I'm sorry, you're going to have to move, because this is where I wanted this man to sit. That's a sobering thought. You were invited to a wedding. And there is a possibility, however remote, that one person was invited to that wedding that is more honorable than you. Good grief. How can I live with this? But it is a possibility that whatever circumstance, at whatever time, and no matter how exalted you are in your own eyes, there may be somebody who is more honorable than you who will be invited to this particular place. He says, I'll tell you what you do. When you are bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you shall have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with you. For whoever exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. Funny, isn't it? Even in such a simple thing as choosing chairs, when you walk into a room, you are supposed to deny yourself pride, self-exaltation, making decisions to elevate yourself into a higher position. Now, in college, that always translated out, everybody came into class, took the back seats. What nobody realized was that those were the preferred seats. The more dangerous seats were down front, and those were the least seats, and that's where if you really were going to be humble, you ought to sit right down front, where the instructor can get at you and humiliate you and call on you and answer questions and all those types of things. But, you know, it's funny how that we get, you know, this type of thing happens to us. We get this inverse type of vanity. And it was funny, there's in the Screw Tape Letters, which is something C.S. Lewis wrote, where he imagined this archdemon called Screwtape writing to his nephew called Wormwood. And they're writing back and forth about how to deal with Christians and how to disrupt and interfere with and stop things from happening. He says, there is going to come occasion where this fellow that you're working with is going to achieve a degree of humility. As soon as he gets there, make it a point to call it to his attention that he has suddenly arrived at humility. If you will just call it to his attention, he will be unable to avoid feeling proud that he has become humble. And I know that that is true. For every time in my life that I have suddenly become aware of a true act of humility or a true act of selflessness, it was followed right on the heels. I mean, just trumping in the door behind it with this thing. Ah, you did a good thing, didn't you? Pat yourself on the back. You deserve a break today. This bud's for you, or whatever it is that we like to congratulate ourselves for the little things that we do. Of course, the fact is that humility is by its nature selfless. Selfless. And to what extent your mind is upon yourself, you have lost it. It's gone. It's gotten away from you. And once again, you have fallen into the old trap of vanity, which it does, it seems, follow on our heels so much of our lives. Now, when I think about this, if I think if it's important, if I'm asked to a wedding, and even here there's a funny little thing going on, if you noticed it. There is a tiny little appeal to your pride in this warning that Christ gives you. Because he said, now if you go into this wedding and you take this chief seat, he's going to say, I'm sorry, there's a more honorable than you bidden. You go down here and you take this seat. How are you going to feel? What are you going to be thinking about? You're going to say, oh, what are all these people thinking? And I'm embarrassed. Why am I embarrassed? Because all these people see me being asked to move down in here. Whereas if you take a low seat and he comes and says, what are you doing sitting in here? We want you in here. We want you at the head table. And he drags you up there. Think how good you're going to feel. Even Jesus appealed to your pride to keep you from making a fool of yourself with too much of it. Right? So once again, we may be really looking at a continuum, a difference in degree in pride, not so much a difference in kind. Here's good pride and here's bad pride. But as it runs along this thing, and somewhere in here, we start going bad. And you know, of all people who have the hardest time probably seeing where that is, you're the one who's going to have the most difficulty seeing where it is for you. And you're going to always tend to see yourself as being, well, I'm not stepped over the line. This is not pride on my part. And sometimes you may only begin to really understand what's happened to you when you look at it in retrospect after it's all over rather than beforehand. Now turn back a few more pages, if you would, to Romans, the 12th chapter. I think it'd be worth it to your time to go through the book of Proverbs and mark every scripture you come to that deals with pride and humility, and kind of memorize some of them and really mark those that hit you the hardest, because there'll be ones you'll want to go back to again and again and remind yourself. Paul wrote to the Romans and said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable or intelligent service. This is not an unreasonable thing I'm asking of you. I want you to take your body, this old bod of yours that you have to get out of bed in the morning and comb its hair and brush its teeth and wash its face and get it down to church on Sabbath. I want you to present that body as a living sacrifice to God. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to Him. And I'm not making an unreasonable request. This is reasonable. And if you are able to get to the place to where you, not merely your body, but yourself belongs to God, and if you can think in those terms, does this have any reference to your pride? He goes on to say, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. For I say, through the grace that is given to me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man a measure of faith. Interesting verse. A simple exhortation, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Now, you know, it's inevitable that we are going to spend a lot of our lives thinking about ourselves. And so, since we're going to do that anyway, why don't we take a moment of our time and do a little self-inventory? Because it does not forbid you to think well of yourself. The Scriptures do not. They do not forbid you or call upon you that if you are a clever person, an intelligent person, to think of yourself as being dumb and stupid, because in the process of doing that, you're lying. And there can be no, this may be some sort of an inverse snobbery that we sometimes like to talk about being stupid, whenever in fact we know and everybody else knows that we're not. The converse is another discussion. We'll have to talk about that another time. But the point simply being that it's good for a person to sit down and take inventory of himself. Do a little resume for yourself. I have got this much education. I really do. There's no point in kidding myself that I didn't get out of grade school if I got all the way through college, is there? And so I'll put down what my education is and what my degrees are, and just how good I think those degrees are based upon the institution I came for. And let's not badmouth ourselves nor build ourselves up. Let's just look at what we are. Can you sing? Do you sing badly? Do you sing well? Do you sing in the shower and don't dare sing anywhere else? What sort of a talent do you have? Are you a musician? Are you good at it? Well, if you are, there is no reason not to put down, I am a musician and I'm good at it. There are those who are better, but I am good at it. This is where you have to be careful with yourself. But again, you accomplish nothing before God by lying or being dishonest about who you are and what you are. For the only way to get rid of pride or to deal with pride is through honesty and truth. The real truth. about yourself and what you can do and what you can't do. Can you speak? Can you put coherent thoughts together? Can you write? Are you good at it? Are you using these things that God has given you? Or have you let them die and let them atrophy? Being honest with yourself about yourself is the very first step along the way to dealing with these things. Now, Jesus told us little things that we should do, such as taking the least seats. But at the same time, he didn't ask us to hide our light under a bushel. If we do have a talent that can be of use to other people in God's church, we should make that known. Not ostentatiously, but generously and out of a pure heart. Paul goes on to say, we have many members in one body, and all members don't have the same office. So we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members one of the other. Having then gifts given according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith. Now, depending upon how you want to define the word prophecy or prophesying, we might find some people in the Church of God who have a gift of prophesying. I think probably Mr. Ted Armstrong does, if you want to talk in terms of prophesying as being inspired preaching. Foretelling the future, I would want to back off of that just a little bit, because neither one of us or any of us have really been given much of a gift of looking ahead to the future beyond what we see in the pages of the Bible. Ministry. Serving, in other words. Let's wait on our serving. Let's pursue that. Let's take care of it. There are those who have been given the gift of serving. That means helping other people. And if you've been given that gift, then you ought to carry on with it and get after it and be good at what you do. He that exhorts on exhortation. He that gives, let him do it with generosity. He that rules, let him do it with diligence. He that shows mercy, let him do it with cheerfulness. And that's one of the hardest things you've ever been given to do, is to show mercy and don't be grudging in the process of doing it. Well, I'll let you off this time, but you'd better not do it again. Let love be without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love in honor, preferring one another. What is that? What it means is deferring to one another. It's the kind of thing that happens when two of us walk up to the door and you step aside and hold the door and say, go ahead. Or, here, let me hold that while you unlock your car door. It's a lot of the things that have to do with pure common courtesy to one another. A courtliness, a generosity, a giving spirit, a sharing spirit. Here, have some of mine. This is deferring to one another. Here, step in line ahead of me for food. Or, let me over and get you a plate to someone who might be handicapped. How can I help you? Type of a spirit. Now, this is very much the opposite of a person who thinks of himself more highly than he ought to think, isn't it? Here's where we can maybe begin to see two spots on this continuum of pride that is justifiable and pride that is not, that we can identify where they are, of the person who thinks of himself more highly than he ought to think, and the person who defers to others in the church generously and takes a lesser seat and lets someone else into the line ahead of time. And, of course, you could wind up to a situation where you can't get anybody to start. If we all get that way, but then that can be a kind of vanity too, can't it? We're almost trapped and damned if we do and damned if we don't. But I'd sure a whole lot better rather be a part of a church where you had a hard time getting someone to be first to the line in food than someone where they step on one another getting there, wouldn't you? So maybe we ought to learn to do the common courtesies, even though something down inside of us cries out to be exalted, that we should make it a point to humble ourselves. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. And this affection is really the antithesis of pride in a lot of ways, because it is very hard to be truly competitive with someone you really love. And whenever competitiveness starts entering the picture, love oftentimes goes out the window and gets eaten up and stepped on and walked over. And both in families and in churches and wherever else it may be, pride is the absolute antithesis of love. It's a destroyer of love. It's a fighter of love. And Paul presents us with, on the one hand, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. Be kindly affectioned to one another instead. Not slothful in zeal, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. You know, these are the areas where we almost never have disruptions because people do them. Think about this. That we oftentimes have problems in the church because people neglect to distribute to the necessity of saints, or because people are not given to hospitality, but we don't often have disruption in the church because people are given to hospitality, do distribute to the necessity of saints. We have it in areas like preaching. And I would say, as I said before, that pride is probably the most destructive force that exists in the church. It more often than any other place finds its focus in preaching and who is going to and what he's going to say. These are the areas where pride rears its ugly head more often than any other. If you're worried about how you're going to be, don't concern yourself about preaching or teaching or influencing the behavior of others. Give attention to distributing to the necessity of saints. Be given to hospitality. Bless them who persecute you. They give you a hard time. Do something nice for them. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Realizing that every step of the way, when you do something good, wormwood will be there right behind you calling it to your attention that you did. Even to the point of blessing those who persecute you. If someone does you wrong, let's do good for him, but let's do it in a way that will embarrass him. What have we done? What have we accomplished? Absolutely nothing. But that's the way we are. And it's the way we destroy ourselves. And it's the way we destroy our relationships with one another. Bless them. Rejoice with them that rejoice. Laugh with them. Weep with those that weep. Be of the same mind one to another. Don't concern yourself about high things, but be concerned with men of low estate. Actually, the margin says, be contented with mean things. Contentment. You know, that's the operative word. For it is in the very nature of pride not to be content. To be frustrated. To not be happy. To achieve and still not be happy. Because I want more. I have to achieve more. Or I achieved it and no one saw it. But there will be something which will keep us from enjoying it. Be not wise in your own conceits, which is probably the biggest single cause of disunity among people, isn't it? Because we both are wise in our own conceits. The problem is we both absolutely know to be sure and beyond refutation, but we both know exactly the opposite things and are sure and won't give in. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. There does come a time when you can't do it, by the way. There does come a point in time when someone's pride, someone's ego has gotten him so exalted and has become so absolutely abhorrent even before God that you cannot live peaceably with him and you've got to get away from him or get him away from you. That time comes. Now, as much as possible, live peaceably. But remember, the word possible is there. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but give place unto wrath. As it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. And wrath and anger, by the way, is one more thing that sits along a continuum from right to wrong. There is such a thing as being angry and not sinning. But somewhere along the line, somewhere down the continuum, we cross that line into evil with our anger and with our hatred and our hostility toward other people. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink. For in so doing you shall heap coals of fire on his head. And I can't help but wondering, though, that if I say to myself, I want to heap coals of fire on his head, so therefore I'm going to do good to him, if I have really gotten anywhere at all, I wonder. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. 1 Corinthians, Paul addresses a similar subject, but a different way. A different problem had raised its head in Corinth. He says, I beseech you, brethren, in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 10, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and the same judgment. Now, I want y'all to understand something in this church. We aren't there. Did you know that? We are not perfectly joined together in the same mind and the same judgment right here in Tyler. Nor are we of the same mind and the same judgment up here in, what shall we say? I'm almost afraid to mention another church's name. Because last time I did that, I got several letters from those people, people in that church, so I won't do that today. And we're not of the same mind and same judgment necessarily from one. This church is of one mind, and that church over there is of another mind. You really wonder, is Paul asking us to do something here that we just can't do, or is it something we have not grown up enough yet and haven't matured enough, haven't come to the place to where we're able? And I also feel sometimes that if we get to the place, boy, here we all are. Here's this church. We're all the same mind and the same judgment, and we're getting along, and we're doing good, and everything is so wonderful. And then there's going to come one more person into this church, and he's not going to be that way. And he's going to come rolling in through here and create little eddy currents, like all through the church, little shock waves. And then here comes another person that's the same. The first thing you know, this wonderful, idyllic little church we've had has been all messed up by all these new people coming into it. Maybe we ought to just keep them out. But then that's absurd, isn't it? So maybe we're supposed to struggle with this type of thing, because I will tell you that Corinth had not gotten there either. Otherwise, Paul's not telling them what he's telling them. He says, "It has been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you." Now this I say, each one of you is saying, "Well, I am of Paul," or "I am of Apollos," or "I am of Cephas." And then there was the smart one, he said, "Well, I'm of Christ." But the whole objective of the whole thing was they all got divided up into parties. And they were all pointing fingers back at one another, giving them the salute, of the pointed finger. And it just split the church. Well, where was this coming from? What was going on here? Well, this guy is better than this guy. And comparisons are all being made. And, well, I'm going to ally with this man because this is a better party than this party over here. And I don't want to be a part of those people. They got a wrong spirit and a wrong attitude. They can come to church here because we're good enough to allow them to be here. But they're not right. Finger pointing gets real exciting sometimes. He says, in fact, Paul was tired. He said, "Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul?" I'm grateful I didn't baptize anybody to speak of down there unless somebody says I'm baptizing in my own name. He was frustrated. You can see it as he works his way down to it. And finally he comes in verse 26. He says, "Now, you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called." Now this is very true. And of course, as a freshman in college, I remember I used to, when they read this to us and exhort us on this thing, I used to say, yeah, but it says not many. There are a few. Maybe I'm one of the few. The older I get in the ministry, the more I have come to realize that it is the noble and the wise and the mighty that God does call who are most difficult for him to use. They are among those who are least effective, who sometimes wind up being of very relatively little value to the church. Not that they're not called, they are. Why is that so? Well, he answers it. He says, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. That, of course, couldn't possibly be you, could it? He's chosen weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty. But, of course, that doesn't mean you. And he's chosen base things of the world. What do you mean base? I mean a low-life person. He's chosen people who are low-lives. And things that are despised, looked down upon with contempt by many, and things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. And so consequently, I look in the mirror, and I see me, and I say to myself, to whatever extent I have been effective in being used by God, the implications of that are that maybe the more effective I am in being used by God, the more foolish, the more base, the more despised maybe he saw me when he called me. Do you suppose? Because his objective in using me instead of using somebody else was in order that no flesh, and that includes mine, might glory in his presence. But on him are you in Christ Jesus, who of God has made unto us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that according as it is written, he that glories, let him glory in God. This is the fundamental charter right here of those whom God calls to use and do something with them in his work. Paul makes the point again and again through 1 Corinthians that the whole objective and the way God chooses to work with people is he chooses people who have no reason to glory, in order that no one would glory in them, but would rather glory in him. And so as you look around you in the church and you find those who seem to be somewhat, who seem to be people of influence, who seem to be leaders or pillars, to use Paul's terminology when he referred to those at the Jerusalem church, you need to realize that these are not wise or noble or great. These are weak and sometimes base and sometimes foolish. And that God in his mercy and his great compassion called people like those people to use them so that you would honor him and not take sides and get into party spirits and divide yourselves up and to be proud of one against another in the church of God. For in the process of doing so, you have just stepped right into and walked down the steps right behind the original one whose pride made him an enemy